Well, for some analysis now, we can bring in John Lyndon, the director at Alliance for Middle East Peace. It's great to have you with us on the program today. So there's renewed violence in Lebanon after 2 months, mostly without conflict. Now, Hezbollah has previously said that any breach of the ceasefire deal with Israel would not be tolerated. So what do you think its next steps are?
Well, Hezbollah is quite significantly reduced in strength since the time when it was able to issue those sort of statements with a real degree of flexibility of action. They are massively depleted, and the hope is that this is bluster and that we will not see an escalation of attacks coming from Hezbollah. There's also a changed reality inside Lebanon, and that there's now a president in place and an attempt, I think, to try and reassert real sovereignty over all of Lebanon and control of violence. And I think it's really important for the international community to stay focused on that goal. And indeed, the Israelis, what we would love to see at the end of this process is a rehabilitated Lebanon with a strong government and with the Lebanese armed forces able to provide security in southern Lebanon. And I do worry that an escalation like we're seeing today may ideologically empower Hezbollah, if not materially, but it also might weaken President Aoun and the other state building forces within the country. So I hope we will see some restraint from Israel as well, in order to facilitate that reassertion of sovereignty and to allow the Lebanese armed forces to move en masse south of the Litani.
Yeah, it is a test for President Joseph Aoun, isn't it? I mean, he hasn't been in office for long and has yet to demonstrate that he can be an able leader in managing Hezbollah.
Well, exactly, but he also needs to be helped by others externally, both partners in the Arab world and by the international community, and not for short-term sort of tactical interests, whether they be of Israel, of other regional powers, to sort of supersede the longer term ambition of really using this as a moment to finally allow Lebanon to escape decades of a loss of sovereignty and instability, which ultimately hurts Israel almost more than anybody else other than the Lebanese people. So this is a test for the new president. I think it's a test for international partners like President Macron and also President Trump, to really see if we can have that level of support to be able to strengthen President Aoun's hand, and also to speak to the Israelis. And what I've heard from sort of unattributed international sources is that there's talk of a 30-day extension to the initial 60-day ceasefire. If that is indeed the case, it needs to be clearly articulated, and the end of that 30-day process needs to be non-negotiable, so that the president can turn to the people and say, I and this government have managed to return territorial integrity to the people of Lebanon, and that it wasn't done via violence. It was done by diplomacy, strength, and negotiations that ultimately saw Israel honor the deal. And that will require the United States, Europe, and others to be very clear that at the end of this process, Israel must withdraw consistent with the negotiated deal.
Now, there are suggestions that a stronger Lebanese government is in Israel's interests, actually, because it could further curb the influence of Hezbollah. Do you tend to agree with this opinion?
Yes, and not just in Israel's interest, most importantly, in the people of Lebanon's interest, where we haven't had a functioning state really for such a long time. Israel, at least sober-minded strategists in Israel, recognize that a strong centralized Lebanese state with a strong armed forces that has a monopoly over violence is the best possible outcome for the residents of northern Israel to return to their homes and not be in fear of a rearmed, eventually, Hezbollah able to return to violence. And I think also for actors across the Middle East, I mean, with the exception of Iran, there is no state actor that is a friend of Hezbollah and their agenda. So in the kind of Sunni monarchies in the Gulf, in Jordan, in Egypt, I sense there is unanimity over the need to have a really strong Lebanese state emerge at the end of this process. And there's a real confluence of factors that allow it to happen, including most recently the fall of the Assad regime. So the difficulty now of being able to rearm Hezbollah over a land bridge from Iran, and also the way in which Syria has sometimes, or often really, intervened inside Lebanese politics has been one of the destabilizing forces. That's now removed. Iran is weakened. And it would be a real shame for anything that Israel does or others do to weaken this nascent government and ruin the opportunity for Lebanon to escape decades of instability.
And the passing of the deadline poses a dilemma for Donald Trump, too, doesn't it? Because he strongly backs Israel, but he also campaigned on a promise of peace for Lebanon.
Yeah, it does. And I also think this isn't only true of the Lebanese-Israeli axis, but a lot of regional actors are probably thinking about how they test the new Trump administration to clarify what their positions are going to be, because there's a lot of ambiguity. And I do worry that unless there is clarity from the White House on the need for, say it is 30 days, I don't know, I don't have an opinion about that, but whatever the extension that's being alluded to now by the United Nations, whatever that deal is, that's Trump's deal. That was negotiated while he was president rather than Joseph Biden. So I hope that he then uses the strength that he has exhibited in some issues over the last week to be very clear with Israel that is non-negotiable. That is the deal, and Israel will withdraw at the end of it, so that this new centralized government in Lebanon can be empowered, and most importantly, so that people can begin to put their lives back together in southern Lebanon and in northern Israel, return to their homes with a sense of security and stability for the future.
Now, Hezbollah has called on international watchers not to allow Israel any excuses for prolonging the occupation. When it comes to the international mediators' role, how much power do they have in influencing the parties involved?
Quite a significant amount should they choose to use the leverage available to them. Lebanon is in a terrible situation, has been now for a very long time. Its economy is in ruins. We have very significant issues with regards to infrastructure, regards to fiscal stability, regards to the strength of the armed forces. All of those things depend upon international support and donations and solidarity, which can be either withheld or increased dependent upon certain policies and actions. And the same, to a lesser extent, is true with regards to Israel. I mean, it's 15 months into the longest war now in its history. It's reliant, obviously, upon international support, and particularly the support of the United States, in order to maintain its security in general. And I think this is one of those rare times where the interests of these two countries, Lebanon and Israel, are essentially identical. Neither the government of Lebanon nor the government of Israel has an interest in seeing Hezbollah strengthened. The citizens of both states are thirsty for stability, for security, for some semblance of normality. And their international patrons are actually very similar people, strangely now. So the President of the United States, the US is also, I think, the second largest provider of aid to Lebanon. And then France and the European countries are incredibly important. So I would hope that we could get relative unanimity on this specific issue. And it's also an opportunity for us to have Gulf, American, European coordination and hopefully unanimity. I think there's going to be a lot of fracturing of policy between Europe and the United States over the coming months, and it's going to be difficult. This should be one issue where the US, Europe, and their Gulf partners all agree.